Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallama ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. So in the previous lesson, we saw that the argument for the existence of God, the correct argument for the existence of God, is to argue from the universe. The universe is evidence for the existence of God. We saw that in Western philosophy, this kind of argument is called a cosmological argument, and we did a brief overview of the history of the argument for the existence of God in the Muslim scholarly tradition, the tradition of the Mutakallimun, which goes from Ibn Sina through Ghazali and Razi, and there's a particular focus on the argument from huduth, from the fact that the universe began to exist, because that was something that was denied by Ibn Sina. And we saw that in the Western tradition, they follow Greek philosophy as rediscovered. They rediscovered Greek philosophy in a large part through the Muslims. They were influenced by Ibn Sina, and their line of this argument goes through Ibn Sina. It doesn't go through Ghazali, and then so that's why historically the argument, the cosmological argument in the Western tradition, has been the argument from contingency until William Lane Craig in recent times he went back and he highlighted the argument from huduth because of the Big Bang, discovery of the Big Bang and the beginning of the universe. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at these two arguments, the argument from contingency and the argument from creation, from the fact that the universe began to exist. Let's start with contingency. So we're going to start with the argument from contingency. Bismillah. Okay, so the argument from contingency is everywhere in the Quran, and basically what this argument says is that the universe is in need. The universe is needy, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't need anything. So the word contingency in Arabic, this is imkan. You'll find this word in everywhere in books of tafsir. So books of tafsir are, as I explained in the previous class, you can think of these lessons as tafsir lessons because they're just explaining what the Quran says everywhere. And the term imkan, mumkin, which is contingent or possible, it's this another way of the way that it's expressed in the Quran is needy and dependent. So the universe is needy and dependent. So you look at the universe, you see that it needs someone or something to make it the way that it is. So this is something that is known non-inferentially by everyone, even someone who doesn't believe in God. This is actually why a scientist looks up at the sky and says, why is the sky blue? The reason why a scientist looks up at the sky and says, why is the sky blue, is that he, like every single human being who exists, knows that the sky needs something to make it blue. The reason why a scientist, the Newton, if in the story that's, I don't think it's true, but famously ascribed to him that an apple fell on his head and he discovered the law of gravity. So that comes from asking, why is it that apples, when they fall off a tree, they fall down and they don't go in any other direction? So that's a question, a scientific question that's posed, and that scientific question presupposes that you see that the apple needs something to make it go down, and there's no reason why it shouldn't go up. Planetary orbits, the movement of the planets in the heavens, the movements of the stars, the rising and setting of the sun, all of these things, everything in the universe, in fact, the goal of science is to seek to discover why things are the way that they are, what made them the way that they are. So the starting point of science is the same as the starting point of somebody who believes in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the way that the Quran describes it. Now what the Quran will say, and what the ulama will say, and what actually religious believers for centuries and centuries, millennia of human existence, who believed in God, what they will say is that there must be a being, there must be a being who exists necessarily, who made all of these things in order for these things to be here. Why? Because if I say that okay, so the sky needs something to make it blue, and I point to some other reason in the universe, that some other factor. So what's the factor? That, well, the sun is a big burning ball of gas. There's nuclear fusion that's happening, and there's heat that's released, and the heat is released and as electromagnetic waves, and these electromagnetic waves, those of them that are within the visible spectrum, they make their way to the Earth's atmosphere, and then they're scattered, and it's this and they're scattered and they're trapped in the atmosphere, and this scattering of and blue, the wavelength, the blue light in particular, that's part of the electromagnetic spectrum, is particularly scattered because of the way that the atmosphere is made, and the elements that it's made of, and other factors. This is an approximate description. So they say, okay, now this is why the sky is blue. But every single fact that I just mentioned is also a contingent fact. So it leads one to ask the question, why is it that the sun burns, gives off heat in the form of electromagnetic waves? Why is it that when these waves, they reach the Earth's atmosphere, that blue light is scattered more than other kinds of light? Why? And then you'll have another answer for that. But that answer will also refer to something in the universe, and it will be a contingent fact. And so you'll need to ask about that as well. And so what you get is you get a chain. So if you say, so what do we say? And what have religious believers said throughout history? Throughout history, they've said that God is the one who made the sky blue. God is the one who made the sun. God is the one who created the heat of the sun. God is the one who makes the earth, makes the light scatter. And this is actually, a scientist will come and say, well, that's not a real answer. I want to know the real reason. But actually, the way that it should be said is the opposite. Because when the scientist comes and points to a scientific explanation, we should say, well, I want to know the real reason, and that's not the real reason. Because his scientific explanation is just delaying the question. It's just delaying the question. What you do is you find one contingent fact, and then you say, okay, it's because of another contingent fact. But then this other contingent fact, you ask the same question, and then you point to another contingent fact. So explaining the contingent facts of the universe with reference to other contingent facts doesn't answer the question. It just delays the question. In fact, it multiplies the problem. Because first, you only had one problem. Why is the sky blue? Now, you have two problems. Why is the sky blue? And why are all of these other factors that made the sky blue, why are they the way that they're there? So you've made the problem even worse. And then you point to something else, and now you've made it even worse. You haven't answered the question. And then you point to something else, and now you've made it even worse. You haven't answered the question. And explaining contingent facts. What's a contingent fact? Remember that contingency is a modality. So what do we say? What do we mean by something being a contingent fact? What we mean, if you want to be precise, if you want to be, the way that the Muslim logicians and mutakallimun would look at it, is you say that, okay, the sky is blue. This is a statement. But this statement is true contingently. The modality of this proposition is contingent. The sky is blue contingently, which means, what does it mean contingently? It means it can be blue, it cannot be blue. And so it's the fact, it's the contingent nature of this fact that leads us to ask the question, what made it blue? And every single fact in the universe, every single statement that you will make in the universe, plants, leaves are green, plants photosynthesize, the human cell divides. Every single statement that you make about the universe, you can list thousands and thousands and millions of statements, all of them will be contingently true. And all of them are saying, so what and this contingency is something that we see. So this is not something that needs to be proven. So in logic we learn that there are some propositions that in order for them to be true, you need to formulate an argument, because they're inferential propositions. There are other kinds of propositions which we know their truth without inference. And so the contingency of everything in the universe, we see this without inference. And this contingency, what is this? This is, we are grasping something about the universe. What are we grasping about the universe? We are grasping about the universe that it is needy and dependent. That's what we're grasping. And contingency is just a big fancy word that the logicians and the mutakallimun, they said, but the underlying fact of neediness and contingency is everywhere in the Quran. That's what the Quran says everywhere. So when you explain one contingent fact with reference to another contingent fact, you don't explain anything. You just multiply the problem, and it's not possible for it to go on without end. Because if it goes on, there's a number of reasons why it's not possible for it to go on without end. One of the reasons why it's not possible for it to go on without end, sorry, wrong direction, is that that doesn't explain anything. You haven't answered the first question. You haven't answered why the sky is blue, because you've just multiplied the problem, pointed to another problem. It's like you'll find I have a Why Islam is True on that series on YouTube. The first presentation on God exists. It's an explanation of the argument from contingency. And what is this like? It's like a mathematician. So a mathematician who makes an argument, who proves a theorem. A mathematician proves a theorem. And so the mathematician proves a theorem, he writes a wonderful paper. It's an amazing theorem that nobody has ever proven before. So he states the theorem, but he doesn't completely state the proof of the theorem. So he goes and he presents his wonderful theorem, and the mathematicians say, wow, that's really amazing, but what's the proof? How do I know your theorem is true? He says, well, I have another theorem. And if you accept that theorem, this theorem follows from it. And that theorem is another one of my amazing discoveries that nobody else has ever said before. And they say, wow, that's really amazing, but how do we know that theorem is true? He says, well, I have another theorem, and that's the most amazing, that's one of my most amazing theorems. I say, okay, that's fine, it's amazing. What's the proof of that? He said, well, just hold on. Every time you ask me to prove a theorem, I'll just bring up another one, and it goes on without end. No mathematician will accept that, because in order to prove a theorem, you have to end at something that's called an axiom. An axiom is a statement which is true without needing to be proven true. And by same thing over here. In order to explain why the sky is blue, you have to bring an explanation that doesn't need to be made true by anything else. And that is and the way that we express that is through this modality of necessity. So we say that's why this is why in the statement that God exists, this is a statement. This statement here, the modality of this statement is not a contingent modality. It's a necessary modality. It's a different kind of statement. When we say God exists, This is a different kind of statement than the sky is blue. God exists necessarily. In other words, he doesn't need to be given his existence by anyone else. And this is the thing, this is what explains all of these contingent facts. This is a real answer. This is the real answer. The scientific answers, they're useful. They tell us about the relations of contingent things in the universe, but philosophically speaking, they don't give an answer. And scientists, they realize this. That's why they're searching for something called the theory of everything, which they will never find until they accept until they accept the existence of God. And so this is the argument from contingency. This is called dalilul imkan. So, and it's everywhere in the Quran. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the first verse in the Quran that explicitly talks about this, that explicitly refers to the things in the universe as evidence for the existence of God, is in Surah Al-Baqarah verse 164. Verily in the creation of the heavens and the earth. Actually this creation, this is the argument from huduth, because creation is for something to come into existence after not having existed. So huduth and imkan, beginning and contingency, they go hand in hand, as I'll explain shortly. But then after that, the succession of the night and the day. You have night, you have day, you have night, you have day. So one of the things that this verse and other verses they talk about is, they talk about difference, variation. Difference, variegation. Difference and variegation is so I said that you don't need to prove contingency, but because it's something that we detect without needing a proof. But there are, for somebody who denies that the universe is contingent, they say it's a brute fact. That's what atheists say. They say brute fact. Well, they don't, and that's just it's complete hypocrisy, because they don't say that the things that they are investigating in science are brute facts. But when it comes to God, they say brute fact. So to somebody who says brute fact is just another way of saying it's necessary. It must be that way. It doesn't need anything to make it the way that it is. So I use these terms. So some of you may have heard these things. Others may not have, but you will probably hear them in the future. This is the way that atheists talk. These are the terms that they use, and this is what they mean. Often they themselves aren't clear about what they mean. So to somebody who denies contingency, is stubborn and is hypocritical and denies contingency, there's undeniable contingency. When something changes, it means it's contingent. Because if you have night and then you have day, it means the night is not necessary because it's gone. And if it was necessary, it wouldn't have gone. If the day is then replaced by the night, that means the day is contingent, because if it was necessary, it wouldn't have gone. It would have stayed there forever. Something that is necessary, it must be the case, cannot not be the case, but you have day, night, day, night, day, night, day, night. Difference is an undeniable evidence of contingency. And this is one of the reasons why in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He talks about the difference of the things in the universe. Even in this verse, He says the animals of all kinds that He scatters through the earth. There's not just one animal, but there's all kinds of animals. If you look at the animal kingdom, just the insects, the numbers, it's astounding numbers of astounding variety in the various species of insects. So this variegation is evidence of contingency, clear evidence of contingency. Things come, they go, they come, they go, they change. So change means contingency. So and what does contingency mean? Contingency means dependency. It means that it needs someone to make it the way that it is. What does dependency mean? Dependency means that there's someone who is not dependent, who does not have any need, who made things the way that they are. And this is why I said in the previous lesson that in any pre-modern time, before all of the, right now, science has woven its spell on the minds of people, and they think that it explains everything, and they do taqleed of scientists because of their worldly success. But if you just go back a little bit, anybody would say, "You idiot! Who else made the universe?" And this is what they mean. This is what they're expressing. What I've explained. This is what they mean. So the proof that Allah exists is the universe. Who else made the sky blue? Who else makes the winds blow? Who else keeps the birds in the air? Who else makes the sun rise? Who else makes night and day? Who else makes the ships sail in the sea with profit for mankind? By the way, even with planes, right now, most global trade happens through the sea. So this is still, this favor of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is still applicable. He says, who else sends down the rain? Who else brings up the plants? Who else made all these animals? Who else makes the winds blow? Who else makes the clouds? Who else made all of these? In all of these things, إِنَّ فِي ذَلِكَ لَآيَاتٍ لِقَوْمٍ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. Verily, for these there are surely great and momentous signs for those who reflect. So what is this? This is an argument for the existence of God. It's everywhere in the Quran, and it's a conclusive argument. It's not so anybody who says, well, there's no conclusive argument for the existence of God. No, there's a conclusive argument for the existence of God, and it's very simple. And you don't need to study philosophy to understand it. And people who hadn't studied any philosophy, they lived a couple of 100 years ago, understood it better than people who are confused in our times. So philosophy and science and the material success of people who have rejected belief in God have dazzled people. That's why they're confused. If you just use your mind, if you just reflect, it's very simple. It's not difficult at all. So this is the argument from contingency. And here's another series of verses that I referred to in a previous lesson. That these are from Surah Al-An'am. Inna Allah faliqul habbi wan nawa. Verily, it is Allah who splits the date stone and the grain of corn, for example, the grain and the date stone. Allah is the one who splits it. What is this? This is not a statement of faith. This is an argument. It's reality. Allah does this. Who else could do it? Okay, no. Inna Allah faliqul habbi wan nawa. يخرج الحي من الميت ومخرج الميت من الحي ذلكم الله. That's Allah. There He is. So you see Allah everywhere in the universe. فَأَنَّا تُؤْفَكُونَ. So where are you turning away to? فَالِقُ الْإِصْبَاحِ. He is the one who splits open and makes the morning. وَجَعَلَ اللَّيْلَ سَكَنًا وَالشَّمْسَ وَالْقَمَرَ حُسْبَانًا. He is the one who made the night a time of rest and peace, and He made the sun and the moon come in regular rise and set and change their phases in regular intervals so that you can keep time. ذَلِكَ تَقْدِيرُ الْعَزِيزِ الْعَلِيمِ. That doesn't have to be that way. It's a contingent fact. If the rising and the setting of the sun was unpredictable and a different time each year, we would live in complete confusion. We would live in complete confusion because we would have no way to tell the time. We would have no way to pay people for working a number of hours. The number of hours that we calculate it comes from the regularity of the sun. We would have no way of knowing, I'll see you at this time. We would have no way of doing anything, of planning our lives. This all comes from regular, and this is actually with the planet Earth. It's one of the reasons why you have this regularity is because of the large moon that we have. We have an unusually large moon. I think it's the largest moon in the solar system. I think, but compared to the size of the Earth, it's extremely larger than any of the moons, even of Jupiter. And they say that the moon has a stabilizing effect. Otherwise, the Earth would wobble and its axis would change, and there would be, you wouldn't have regular seasons. You wouldn't have a regular night and day. Things would change unpredictably. This is argument by design. We're going to look at the argument by design as well. But what we want to look at is not the design. We want to look at the contingency. Contingency is evidence for the existence of God, even if there's no design. So if everything is disordered, it still proves that God exists, because we're not looking for order. We're looking at contingency. We're looking at dependence. And then there's other things that are mentioned here. Even the first verse in the Quran, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. This is an argument from contingency. Why is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deserves to be praised for everything because He is the one who made everything the way that it is. Why is He Rabbul Alameen, the Lord of the universe, the who takes care of and nurtures everything in the universe? Because He's the one who's running everything in the universe. This is not, so the Surah Al-Fatiha is not a statement of faith, it's a statement of something that you see. And this is why, I said in the previous lesson, that if you understand this, it changes the way you read the Quran. Completely changes the way you read the Quran. And you subhanAllah, you see things that you don't that other people don't see. So this is the argument from contingency. Now what we understand the argument from contingency. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the argument from huduth, and this is the one that Imam As-Sanusi he mentions in his book, and I explained why he mentions this argument in his book rather than the argument from contingency. There's a historical reason why he mentions it. So let's read what he says. So what we're going to do is, I explained the argument from contingency in a very easy to understand way, but what Imam As-Sanusi, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on him, what he does is he arranges things logically. So we're going to, his entire text is organized according to the science of logic. So we're going to, when we're reading what he says, we're going to unpack the argument and write it down to see what he's doing, because he presupposes a study of logic. So he says the demonstrative argument for Allah Most High's existence is the universe began to exist. The universe began to exist. If the universe began to exist by itself without anything to make it come into existence, then he mentions the entailment. So what he's explaining here he's not proving here that the universe began to exist. He's beginning from the fact that the universe began to exist. He's going to give an argument for it shortly. We'll see that in a separate lesson. But for now, he's starting with the fact that the universe began to exist. So the fact that the universe began to exist, he's assuming it's true. So if it's true that the universe began to exist, then this proves the existence of God. How does it prove the existence of God? That's what he's explaining here. How does the fact that the universe began to exist prove that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists? Actually, what this is proving is it's proving that something made it exist. Something made it exist. So let's see what, in order to understand what he is saying, let's look at the logical form, put everything into logical form. So what he's saying, this is what he's saying. So he's saying that the universe began to exist. In Arabic, began to exist, we say hadith. Hadatha, in other words, it began to exist. Huduthul alam is the universe's beginning to exist. So the universe began to exist. Then you say that then second premise is everything that begins to exist needs something to make it exist. So that's the the first one is the minor premise, the second one is the major premise. Yes, I can just label these. So this is the minor premise. The major premise is the one that has everything, kullu, that's why it's major. Minor premise is the universe began to exist. The major premise is everything that begins to exist needs something to make it exist. Then the conclusion is the universe needs something to make it exist. So this is we call this a logical syllogism, and it's on the first form, and we study this in logic. So so how does it? You have the minor premise, the universe began to exist. Everything that begins to exist, beginning to exist here in logic, we call this the middle term. So this is the middle term, and the middle term is repeated in the major and minor and major propositions. And in a syllogism that's on this form, you have four figures. This is the first figure. You have that's on this figure. The middle term is mentioned, wusta in Arabic. The middle term is mentioned as the predicate of the minor proposition and the subject of the major, and it cancels out basically. So it cancels out, and you are left with the subject of the minor and the predicate of the major. The universe needs something to make it exist. That's the conclusion. So this is how the what the logicians do. They describe. This is how the mind reasons. This is how it works, and this is how the syllogism works. So this is the basic argument, and this is what they call the Kalam cosmological argument. The Kalam cosmological argument in modern philosophy, it's basically something like this. Now the first proposition, the minor premise and the major premise, are both inferential. So we have in logic, we learn that a proposition is a statement. So the universe began to exist as a proposition. Everything that begins to exist needs something to make it exist. This is a proposition. So in logic, we learn that propositions can either be inferential. In Arabic, we say nadari, or they can be non-inferential. In Arabic, we say daruri or badihi. There's a slight difference between them, but approximately they're the same. So daruri. So sometimes the people translate daruri as necessary. That's not a good translation. So inferential and non-inferential. This translation is the translation. These are the words that are used in modern analytic philosophy for these terms. So if you actually Google it, you look up the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. There's many philosophical discussions about inference and non-inferential and inferential. And in modern philosophy, people are very confused. They say all kinds of things. But if you study ilm al-tawheed, you study Islamic logic, a little bit of falsafa, then you can actually go into there and you can see that this person went wrong here, this person went wrong here, this person went wrong here. This is what we believe. This is why we believe it. So having contemporary terms helps you relate what the mutakallimun are saying to what people say today. So what he's saying here is not inferential, non-inferential. An inferential proposition is a proposition whose truth you only know that it's true based on inference. And a non-inferential proposition is a proposition which you know it's true without inference. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creates the truth of that proposition in your mind. And there's 5 or 6 different kinds of non-inferential propositions which we study in the science of logic. This is called material logic. So in the course on logic that I teach, in the end sections, there's one of the lessons is on material logic, non-inferential propositions. So you should take that course if you haven't already done it, and relate it to this course, and you'll find that it's all part of one larger system that gives you a lot of intellectual clarity. So propositions can be inferential or non-inferential. Both the minor and the major premises are inferential propositions. So the universe began to exist. This is inferential. What does it mean it's inferential? It means it needs to be proven true. And everything that begins to exist needs something to make it exist. He is treating it as an inferential proposition because he's going to give you an argument for this. But you might say that you might argue that it's actually non-inferential. It's very close to being non-inferential. So, and he begins over here. So what does he say? Let's in light of this outline, let's read what he says. He says the demonstrative argument. This is a demonstrative argument. A logical syllogism is a demonstrative argument, which means that if the first one is if the minor premise is definitely true, and the major premise is conclusively true, then the conclusion is conclusively true. So the conclusion conclusively follows from the two premises. That's a demonstrative argument. So the demonstrative argument for Allah Most High's existence is that the universe began to exist. So it tells you the minor premise. If the universe began to exist by itself without anything to make it exist, then, so what is he doing? Over here, so he gave you the minor premise. He's saying the universe began to exist. He says it's clear from the fact that the universe began to exist that something made it exist. How? By this proposition. But he omits the minor and major, the major premise and the conclusion because it's clear. And then he says and then he gives you evidence for this. So what he's doing here, if the universe began to exist by itself, he is now saying that, okay, let's say that this one is non-inferential. What's the proof that everything that begins to exist needs something to make it exist? What's the proof? So he gives you a logical syllogism. This logical syllogism is a different kind of syllogism. The first one was a categorical syllogism. It consists of X is Y statements. This is now going to be a conditional syllogism. Over here, you put the major premise first. And you say that if the universe began to exist without anything making it exist, then what he says here, then its existence would overcome its non-existence without cause or reason. Cause is a I don't like to use the word cause because it's associated with natural cause, but over here I mean natural cause, over here I mean reason. And then the minor premise is but it is impossible for its existence to overcome its non-existence without cause or reason. Therefore, the universe needs something. The universe, therefore, actually, let me just change this. It's not the universe. If something began to exist without anything, because we're looking at this one. Everything that begins to exist needs something to make it exist. If something that began to exist without anything making it, if something began to exist without anything making it exist, then this. So you have an if and a then. And then, but the then is impossible, is false. Therefore, the if is false. Therefore, everything that begins to exist needs something to make it exist. I'll walk you through this. Okay, so this is the this is logic, and this is the value of logic. What you're seeing here is the value of logic. What logic does is it A, you learn how to define things, and B, you learn how to organize inferences in your mind. So you say that, so you learn that you go step 1, step 2, step 3 conclusion, step 1, step 2, step 3 conclusion. You spell everything out, and then if somebody disagrees, you say, where do you disagree? And you can identify the exact point of disagreement, and then you can answer it. So this is the studying, not just studying logic, but studying logic and then doing logic for a long time. It gives you this ability, and you can't be somebody can't be a mutakallim. Somebody can't be somebody who defends the faith and helps people find certainty unless they can do this, because you need to look at an objection, break it down, and often somebody who's a mutakallim understands the objection better than the one who made the objection. So often the person who normally makes objection is just confused. So you have to just organize it, take people by the hand, step 1, step 2, step 3. You see this is where you're wrong. This is why you're wrong. This is the value of studying logic. So and that's what we're doing here. So what we're doing here is we're going to prove this. So now this is a conditional syllogism. A conditional syllogism the major premise we learn is an if-then statement. If, then. The if, this part, this is called the antecedent. In Arabic we call it the muqaddam. The then is called the consequent. In Arabic we call it the tali. And the rule is that the way that you make if this then this, if A then B, then you look at A and B. If A is true, then B is true, and if B is false, then A is false. That's how you reason. But if A is false, you can't infer anything about B, and if B is true, you can't infer anything about A. So in order to reason from an if-then statement, you either reason from the truth of A or from the falsity of B. So over here, he is reasoning from the falsity of B. So he's saying if something began to exist without anything making it exist, then. So if something began to exist without anything making it exist, so something did not exist, then it began to exist. Then what? It says then its existence would have overcome its non-existence without cause. So something didn't exist, then it began to exist. So you had non-existence, then you have existence. You have non-existence, then you have existence. So it's so we are saying that something must have made its existence overcome its non-existence. So that's what that. So somebody who says that something made it exist, he's saying that something made its existence overcome its non-existence. But if somebody says that nothing made it exist, then what they're saying is its existence overcame its non-existence without anything making it overcome its non-existence. So he's just actually just overcomplicating things. You don't need a proof. Often when you break things down too much, it gives the appearance of complexity when the matter is very simple. And Imam al-Ghazali mentions this. So it's very simple. The door is open, the door is closed, and you look and you find it open. Something made it. Something opened it. You don't need to formulate an argument for it. You know it without inference. But he's just going through the steps, and so don't get lost in the complexity. And what he's basically saying is that the existence and non-existence are contingent. What he is saying is the statement the universe exists is a contingent statement, and the statement that the universe did not exist is a contingent statement. What he is saying is that it's possible for the universe to exist, and it's possible for it to not exist. And since it's possible for it to exist and possible for it to not exist, then if it didn't exist and then it began to exist, its existence could not have come from itself. Because if its existence came from itself, then it would be necessary for it to exist. So the fact that its existence and non-existence are contingent things, contingently true, means that something made it exist. And that's what he says here, that the demonstrative argument for Allah Most High's existence is that the universe began to exist. So that he tells you this, he assumes that you do all of this. And then he says this thing here, this major premise, this is why it's true. He says, if the universe began to exist by itself without anything to make it come into existence, then one of two equally possible things. So existence and non-existence are equally possible. This is another way of saying that the existence is contingent and the non-existence is contingent. One of two equally possible things would both be equivalent to its counterpart and predominate over it without cause. So if you say, so on one side you're saying they're equally possible, they're contingent. But then you're saying that its existence overcomes it. But if its existence overcomes it and predominates it, then they're not the same. They're not both contingent. So if you say that its existence overcame its non-existence without cause, then this is a logical contradiction. Because you accept that they're equivalent, and now you're saying they're not equivalent. So either they're equivalent or they're not equivalent. And he says that is impossible. This is just spelling out this argument. And this is overcomplicating things. But it's good practice for logic. It's very clear that something began to exist, needs something to make it exist. Okay, so now that over here he proved the first premise. So the proof of the first premise, which is that the universe began to exist. This is a real inferential premise. This does need to be proven. So there are two kinds of proofs for this. There's something that I call a philosophical proof, and this is what This is the Kalam cosmological argument. And there's something called a scientific proof. This is the scientific evidence for the Big Bang. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to give you so what the Mutakallimun, what you find in the books of the Mutakallimun is you find the philosophical proof. This is the proof that the universe began to exist just based on reflection. So it's not based on scientific observations, but it's based on observation, but no complex scientific observations and reasoning from them. It's based on the fact that actually, basically, what this says is that it is impossible for an infinite quantity of time to elapse. So this is the essence of the philosophical argument. And this is the essence of what he is saying here. So you're going to see that he's referring to physical objects and their properties, bodies and accidents in a more medieval terminology. But what he's really saying, what they're really saying is that it is impossible for an infinite quantity of time to elapse. So I have a long lesson on, about an hour-long lesson on YouTube that explains why this is the case. And I explain it in detail, and I'm going to refer you to listen to that lesson. Because I explain it so what I want you to keep in mind is that this is a very simple fact, because it's actually, you can see it, because if you have an infinite quantity of time, if something is infinite, it means it doesn't come to an end. If it elapses, it means it comes to an end. So it's a contradictory statement. To say that something infinite, something doesn't end, this is actually, it's unscientific. It's something that we never observe. It's counterintuitive, and naturally everything in the universe has an age. The tree has an age, I have an age, the building has an age. Every single thing that we point to in the universe has an age. Therefore, it makes sense for the entire universe to have an age. This is something that we know intuitively. The arguments that are around it, they appear to be complex. And the reason why they're complex is because of the complexity of the objection. I just explained shortly that often things, they seem more complex when you go into answering objections, entertaining objections that are ridiculous. So the whole discussion around this, you have to keep in mind that this is something that's intuitively known, it's natural. The natural assumption would be that the universe began to exist, because that's what we observe. We observe everything in it beginning to exist. The natural assumption would be that it began at some point in the past, because an unending time is an inherently self-contradictory concept, something that we can never understand, and it actually leads to contradictions. It leads to clear contradictions. And what are those contradictions? I explained some of them in the lesson on YouTube. And the reason why this has come now, people imagine that they entertain that this might actually be possible, is because of set theory. So in set theory, you have this, if you studied some calculus, then you've seen the infinity symbol. You've seen the infinity symbol, this sideways 8, and the limit as of 1 over x as x approaches infinity. What exactly does this mean? Or if you have infinite sets. So so in this lesson, I spent some time explaining this, where it comes from, how to understand it, how it's understood by other people, and this is now a part of Kalam. So what Razi and Ghazali did with the philosophy of Ibn Sina, in our times, Ibn Sina is not relevant. His falsafa is the way that he viewed the universe. That nobody views the universe in that way anymore. But what is relevant is science and mathematics, and understanding this is important. So I'm going to point you to that lesson, and it's a detailed explanation of the philosophical argument for the fact that the universe began to exist. I'll quickly just read what Imam Sanusi says. He says the evidence for the beginning of the universe is that the physical objects that comprise it are inseparable from properties that began to exist. So he's saying basically that you have objects like the sun, the moon, like you, like me, like a horse, like a camel. You have these objects, and these objects, they have properties. And these properties, one example of that property is motion and stillness. This is a property here. What he means by a property is not a real attribute, but anything that happens to it. So things that happen to it. So what he is saying is that the physical objects in the universe, things happen to them. Things happen to them, which means they change. So they move and then they're still, and they move and then they're still. So he's saying that the objects, they have properties whose that change, and we see this change. We see that they were moving, and then the motion disappeared, and now it's still, and then the stillness disappeared, and now it's moving. Of course, so this is just an example. Now, with the theory of relativity, it's very difficult to say what's moving and what's still, because everything is relative, and describing the motion of objects in the universe becomes very complex task. But you could use other properties, and there's still an absolute frame of reference, the speed of light. Let's just keep that in mind. That's something that would probably need to come in a contemporary presentation of this. But the physical objects that comprise the universe are inseparable from properties that begin to exist, such as motion, stillness, and other properties. They grow in size, their color changes, and so on. And the rule is that anything that is inseparable from something that began to exist must itself have begun to exist. So he's saying that you have an object, and the object has this property, and then it has another property, and then it has another property, and it has another properties. So the properties, they come in and out of existence. We can infer from this that the object also came into existence. Why is that? So this is actually, so what they say here is, the ibara of the mutakallimun, what the mutakallimun they say is that it is impossible for an so what they say is an infinite series of events into the past is impossible. This is what they say. This is called in Arabic we say tasalsul hawadith la awwala laha. And there's books that have been written on this. Tasalsul hawadith la awwala laha, which means the regress, the series of hawadith. What's a hadith? Hadith is something that happened. It's an event. This is another translation of the word hadith. So tasalsul hawadith la awwala laha means an infinite series of events into the past. This is impossible. And another way of saying that, which is how in my presentation, is it's impossible for an infinite quantity of time to elapse. They're equivalent statements, but this latter one is more intuitive to us because it connects with concepts in mathematics and set theory in a more clear way than this first one does. This first statement, it connects more clearly with the falsafa of Ibn Sina. This is just a re-expression of the same thing. And so this is the way that I think it's better to state and to disprove. So that's essentially what he's saying here. And what's the argument? The argument, I'll point you to my lesson that's on the website. He says the evidence that properties began to exist is that we see them go from non-existence into existence and from existence into non-existence. So this argument here, it says that the objects. So he's saying that the way that the argument works is he's saying that things themselves, we may not see them come into existence, but the properties of the things in the universe, they change. We might not see the matter of the universe come into existence, but the properties of the matter, we see them change, and we can infer from that the universe as a whole began to exist, because an infinite series of events into the past is impossible. How do we know that the properties begin to exist? Well, we see them. That's what he's saying here. So this is an approximate presentation, detailed presentation for the philosophical proof, which is the Kalam cosmological argument, which is convincing. I'm convinced by it. And I think it's just the complexity of it comes from the complexity of the one who objects. And the statement itself is clearly true intuitively without needing any evidence. But now today we also have scientific evidence. And the scientific evidence is clearer. And it's part of Kalam, it's part of Ilm al-Tawheed now, to learn this scientific evidence. And I have another lesson in which I go through the scientific evidence in 20 minutes. Anyone with a basics high school education in physics can understand it. And it's good to review and read around it. And so this here, it's actually in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's a very wonderful verse in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَوَلَمْ يَرَى الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. So this is Pickthall's translation. He said, have not those who disbelieve known. So actually the word in Arabic is not do they not know, but the word in Arabic is do they not see. أَوَلَمْ يَرَى الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. Don't they see? And this is very subhanallah. You can actually the fact that the traces of the beginning of the universe can be seen. And there's the traces of the beginning of the universe can be seen. Why? Because when we look up at the night sky and we see that it's black, this is a trace of the beginning of the universe. And I explained that in my lesson on the argument for the Big Bang. When we look at far off stars, and we observe, and we can figure out the elements that are being formed in the nuclei of the stars by looking at the light and seeing gaps, lines in the light. I point to that in the lesson. And then we can see that this is shifted, something called a red shift. It's something that we see. You can see this thing called the red shift. You can see it, and you can see a trace of the fact that the universe began to exist. You can actually you can figure out the distances of universe and look back into the past. So we can actually look back something called deep space, and there's more than deep space now. But you look back, and you can look back when something is very far away. When light takes billions of years to arrive at Earth, then when you see a star that's far away, you're actually looking back to see what the universe looked like billions of years ago. And if you look at the elements that those stars are made of, those elements are generally simpler. It points to the fact that the universe began to exist. That it became more complex. You can look at the elements, the elements in the universe. Most of the elements in the universe are helium and hydrogen. Why? This is evidence, and everything else, it was formed in the nuclei of stars, and things began in a very simple way. You can see the traces of the evidence of the Big Bang. It's really, to study this aspect in cosmology. It's very subhanallah. It's very amazing. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's what's amazing is that the people who discovered it were not Muslims. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, have not those who disbelieve, who don't believe, who aren't Muslims, أَوَلَمْ يَرَى الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا see أَنَّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ كَانَتَا رَتْقًا, that the heavens and the earth were joined. And this tafsir of ratq, this is not a new tafsir. The companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, it's found in our books of tafsir, they explained ratqan as it means they were one thing. And this is exactly what because the Big Bang began, the universe was all compressed into a single point. So the heavens and the earth. أَوَلَمْ يَرَى الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَنَّ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضَ كَانَتَا رَتْقًا فَفَتَقْنَاهُمَا. Then we parted them. This is the Kalam cosmological argument. Everything that begins to exist needs a cause. We parted them. فَفَتَقْنَاهُمَا وَجَعَلْنَا مِنَ الْمَاءِ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ حَيٍّ. And we made every living thing out of water. Will they not then believe? So the scientific evidence is alluded to in the Quran, which actually it is this and many other verses in the Quran that have that miraculously correspond to the discoveries of modern science. They show that the one who is speaking in the Quran is the one who made the universe. You can see this is very clear in the Quran, but also it points to this aspect of it. And so we should now in any modern education in ilm al-tawheed, part of it should be the evidence for the fact that the universe, the scientific evidence for the fact that the universe began to exist. So this is an overview of the argument for the existence of God from contingency and the argument for the existence of God from creation. As we go through the arguments for the other attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm going to bring out some more differences between these two arguments, because the argument isn't complete yet. The argument, in order to see the completion of the argument, you need to go all the way down to the argument for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge, will and power. That's when everything is completed, and that's when everything else falls into place. We'll do that in the next lesson. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.